Chapter 1: The Cracks That Were Always There. If your own children tried to prove you were losing your mind just to sell the land you built your life on, what would you do? My name is Linda Marsh, and the day I overheard my son asking a corporation how fast they could remove me from my own farm was the day I realized the betrayal was bigger than debt or desperation. They forged papers, twisted my medical records, and planned to take everything while calling it love. What they never expected was the man who showed up alone at my gate, a billionaire who knew the soil better than they knew my heart, and who told me he would only invest if I stayed. That moment did not save me, but it gave me the proof I needed to fight back with something far stronger than anger. The morning the cracks finally showed themselves did not look any different from 100 mornings before it. I woke up before the sun, the way I always do, and padded across the old hardwood floor toward the kitchen window. Outside, Maple Ridge lay quiet, the hills of western Colorado still wrapped in that faint purple haze that comes just before first light. Marshfield acres stretched out beyond the glass, the pastures sloping down to the skinny creek that no longer ran as full as it did when David was still alive. For more than 40 years, this land had been my whole world, my work and my refuge and my promise to a man who was no longer here. I put on the coffee and stood with my hands around the warm mug, watching rows of kale and tomatoes sit in the gray light. We had converted fully to organic more than a decade ago. Back then, it had felt like a leap of faith that somehow still made sense. Now, every bag of organic feed, every truckload of approved compost, every test of the soil felt like a little weight added to my chest. By the time I pulled my boots on and stepped out onto the back porch, the air already tasted dry. The weather station had been warning us for months that this would be another hard year. The snowpack had been light, the spring rains scattered and thin. You did not need a scientist to tell you that. You could read it in the way the grass snapped under your heels instead of bending. Rafael Ortiz was already by the barn, his clipboard tucked under one arm, ball cap pulled down low. He had been with the farm for years, long enough to see David through his last harvest and to see me try to keep everything going after the funeral. "Morning, Miss Marsh," he said, his tone careful, but carrying that edge I had learned to recognize, the one that meant he had news that would cost money. "What is it now?" I asked, even though I already had an idea. He walked me over to the main irrigation line that fed the upper fields. The plastic was worn and chalky, patches upon patches running along its length. He had marked a few places where leaks had sprung up again, damp spots darkening the dust. "We can keep patching," he said, "but it is throwing good effort after bad. If we do not replace at least this main run and move to drip on the south field, we are going to lose more water than the plants ever see. With the heat they are forecasting, that means losing part of the harvest." I ran my hand along the pipe, feeling the brittle give under my fingers. Replace meant a number my savings account did not want to hear. Replace meant talking to the bank in town, sitting across from a boy in a suit who would look at my age and my widow status and see risk instead of roots. I told Rafael I would think about it and asked him to send me the estimates. He nodded, not pressing, but the worry sat behind his eyes. It sat in my chest too, right next to the ache that had never quite left since the day David did not wake up. Inside, the old clock in the hallway chimed 8, and somewhere in that sound, I realized it was the day my children were arriving. The thought did not bring relief. It brought a tightness in my throat. Nathan and Chloe had not been home together since the memorial service for their father. Life, as they like to say, had gotten busy. Nathan had his clients in Denver, Chloe had her brand deals and travel, and whatever else filled the glowing square of her phone. They called on holidays, sent gifts that felt more like obligations. I told myself that was how it was for grown kids now, but the truth still stung when I watched other families around town crowding into Boots after church. I heard the car before I saw it, gravel crunching in a way that told me it wasn't a farm truck. Nathan pulled his sleek sedan right up to the side of the house, careful to avoid the ruts. He stepped out in pressed slacks and a pale blue shirt, tie loosened just enough to say he was off the clock. His hair was trimmed sharp, his jaw tight. His eyes flicked over the fields the way a man glances at numbers on a screen, not the way David used to stand and just breathe this place in. Chloe arrived not long after, in a compact SUV that still smelled new when she opened the door. She floated out in leggings and a sweatshirt with some brand name splashed across the chest, her blonde hair swept into an effortless knot that probably took 15 minutes in a tutorial. A phone rested in her hand like it grew there. "Mom," Chloe said as she came up the steps, leaning in for a quick, perfumed hug, "you look tiny, like the farm has been eating you alive." She laughed, but there was an edge to it. Nathan kissed my cheek with the distracted air of someone ticking a box off a list. We sat at the worn kitchen table where I had taught them to do math, where David had spread out seed catalogs in late winter. I had made coffee and set out biscuits and jam, the kind of simple spread that used to make them roll their eyes when they were teenagers. Now they barely touched it. Nathan didn't waste much time. He asked about the yield last year, about the cost of feed, about the price I had gotten at the farmer's market. The questions stacked up not like concern, but like a spreadsheet building toward a conclusion. Chloe chimed in here and there, mentioning friends who had keyed my little farm on her social media and thought it was cute, like a backdrop instead of a life. Then Nathan leaned back, fingers steepled in front of him, and told me there was an opportunity I needed to hear. He said there was a company out of Denver, Summit Ridge Holdings, that specialized in taking over rural properties from owners like me and creating something more efficient and profitable. They had seen the potential in Marshfield Acres, he said. They were offering a very generous price. I could pay off everything, move into a nice condo in town where I wouldn't have to worry about pipes and drought and broken tractors. I could finally rest. Chloe nodded enthusiastically and talked about how she could help me pick out furniture, how she could feature my reinvention on her channels. She told me that I deserved to live like other women my age, and spending my senior years wrestling with irrigation systems was frankly heartbreaking. While they spoke, the coffee in my cup went cold. I kept seeing David at this very table, hands rough with dirt, eyes bright when we talked about the next season. We had never measured our life here in profit and loss. We had measured it in calves born strong, in tomatoes that tasted like summer on your tongue, in neighbors who came because they trusted what we grew. I listened to my children outline a future for me that did not include this house, did not include these fields, did not include any version of myself that I recognized. When they finally stopped, both of them looking at me as if waiting for the obvious yes, I breathed in slow and told them no. Nathan blinked, as if he'd misheard. Chloe's lips parted. I said I wasn't selling, that this farm was not a stock to be traded. It was a promise I had made to my father. It was the only place I had ever truly belonged. The temperature in the room changed, although the air had not moved. Nathan's jaw clenched. He told me I was being emotional, that I wasn't thinking of the bigger picture. Chloe said it wasn't fair for one person to cling to something that could change life for all of us. As they talked, the shape of it finally became clear. This was not about my health or my comfort. This was about the number they had in their heads, the problems that lump of money could solve for them. Nathan mentioned student loans in a slow market. Chloe talked about brand deals that had fallen through, about the cost of living in Los Angeles where she hoped to move. Every sentence circled back to the same center: money. Not roots, not legacy, money. A tightness built in my chest that had nothing to do with age or heart trouble. It was the ache of understanding that the children I had raised on this soil now looked at it and saw only leverage. The conversation frayed. Nathan said he and Chloe were trying to help me before something bad happened, before I fell or got sick out here alone. Chloe said people in town thought it was sad, me rattling around on all these acres with no one but field hands
and old memories. Each comment came wrapped in concern, but when you stripped away the words, what was left cut deep. I told them again that I was not selling, not to some holding company that had never spent a winter here. Nathan pushed his chair back so hard it scraped the floor. He said I was keeping everyone stuck, that I was closing the door on a life I could actually enjoy. Chloe stared at the ceiling like she was trying not to cry. For a moment there was silence, that heavy kind that used to come after a thunderclap in the middle of the night. Then Chloe's frustration slipped ahead of her judgment. "If you do not sign soon," she said, "they are going to pull the special terms and then this whole thing falls apart. They are not doing this for the dirt, Mom. You should understand that." Nathan shot her a sharp look, but it was too late. The words were out, hanging between us like smoke. They are not doing this for the dirt. I sat very still. The clock in the hallway ticked, and the fridge hummed, and somewhere outside a crow called, sharp and lonely. I looked at my children, at the empty plates on the table, at the faint ring of coffee in my cup. For the first time, I felt something underneath the fear and the hurt. It was suspicion, quiet and cold, settling into the cracks that had been there all along. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Man Who Knew the Land. The next day slid by in that strange, slow way time has when your mind is too busy to match your body. I did the chores, I walked the fields, I checked the fences and pretended I was only looking for breaks in the wire instead of breaks in my life. Every time I glanced toward the house, I saw Nathan and Chloe at the table, heard their voices in my head talking about opportunities and special terms and a future that did not have my boots in this dirt. By late afternoon, the light over Maple Ridge had turned softer, that warm gold that makes even dry grass look forgiving. I was in the lower orchard checking the irrigation heads we still had working when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel drive. It was not the sound of Nathan's sedan or Chloe's shiny SUV. It was heavier, slower, unfamiliar. I wiped my hands on my jeans and started back toward the house. A silver pickup was parked near the barn, clean but not flashy. A man stood beside it, tall, with gray at his temples and a sun hat in one hand. He wore jeans, a faded button-down, and boots that had seen actual dirt, not the staged kind you see in advertisements. He saw me and lifted a hand in greeting. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. "Linda Marsh. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." There was something in the way he said my name that made me straighten a little. People from town still called me Mrs. Marsh, but there was usually a question in it. In his voice there was only certainty. "That depends," I said, walking closer. "Who are you, and how do you know my name?" He smiled,
a quick thing that did not feel rehearsed. "My name is Andrew Cole," he said. "I work in technology, mostly infrastructure. About 10 years ago, I started putting serious money into sustainable agriculture. I have had my eye on this valley for a long time." I studied him. No entourage, no clipboard of assistants, just a leather notebook tucked under his arm. "People have had their eye on this valley for as long as I can remember," I said. "They usually come with contracts already printed." "I am not carrying anything like that today," he answered. "I'm here to look and to listen, if you are willing." There was an ease to him, but not the smoothness I had seen in agents and developers. He did not try to step closer than felt right. He did not start listing offers. He just stood there and waited. "All right," I said after a moment. "You wanted to see the place. Walk with me." We started with the upper pasture. He did not just glance from a distance. He walked out across the field, knelt, scooped up a handful of soil, and crumbled it between his fingers. He held it up to the light, rubbed it against his palm. "High loam content," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Good microbial structure, even after all this drought. You cut back on tilling around 2012, I'm guessing." I stared at him. "We stopped plowing deep the year after David's heart attack," I said slowly. "It was too much strain on the tractor and on him." "How would you know that from a handful of dirt?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Because this is what I do when I'm not sitting in front of a server stack," he said. "I read land. I funded a study out here back in 2012, long-term resilience in mixed-use valleys. We pulled core samples from a dozen properties. This one stood out even then." "You never said your name had anything to do with that," I replied. "Back then, I was just a line at a grant, a C at the end of somebody else's initials. Andrew Cole did not mean anything to anyone except the folks who saw my signature on their checks." We walked to the vegetable rows next. He ran a hand lightly over the kale leaves, bent to look at the underside where the bugs like to hide. He asked about planting dates, about when the creek had started running lower, about how many people I had on payroll now compared to before David died. Every question told me he already knew the outline. He was filling in details. We ended up by the barn, leaning against the fence, watching Raphael check a date down by the corrals. "You have kept this place alive through some hard years," Andrew said. "Most folks would have folded after 2018. For that alone, I have my respect." Respect was not a word I heard much anymore. People said, "Bless your heart," and called me a trooper. They told me I was stubborn. Respect felt different. It landed somewhere deep. "What is it you really want here?" I asked. People from Denver have been circling this valley like hawks. They use words like revitalization. It usually means concrete. He shook his head. "Concrete is someone else's game. I've been building data centers and networks my whole adult life. Rare earth metals and rare talent. You know what's rarer than both of those? Land that can still feed people 50 years from now. What I want is to partner with places that have a chance at that." "Partner," I said. "Not buy?" "Partner," he repeated. "There's an idea I've been developing, a network of working farms that can serve as both producers and teaching sites. I've been calling it the Heritage Field Project in my notes. This valley, and your farm specifically, is at the top of my list. But I'm not interested in stacking my name on top of a sign while the people who actually know the land get pushed out." I watched him carefully. "So, what does partner look like to you?" I asked. His voice stayed even. "I put in capital, infrastructure, irrigation, renewable energy, the boring things that make a place like this resilient. You keep running the farm the way you know how. We work together on adding some agro-tourism, some educational programs. We share in the upside. The one non-negotiable condition is that you stay. If you sell and walk away, I'm not interested." A chill moved through me. Not a bad one, just sharp. It was the first time in a long while that someone had spoken of my presence here as an asset instead of a problem. Everybody else thinks I should retire to one of those apartments above the grocery store. What makes you so sure I'm worth betting on? He turned his head, met my eyes. Because I've seen what happens to land when the last person who loves it gets pushed off. And because I've watched your yield reports, your certification records, even your social media when your daughter decides to feature you. You kept the organic rating through a decade of drought. That doesn't happen accident. That's skill and it's stubborn heart. And I don't buy that. I stand beside it. His words reached somewhere David used to live. For a second, I saw my husband's face streaked with sweat, grinning at a row of tomatoes that had finally set fruit after a late frost. The way he would clap a hand on my shoulder and say that anybody could own land, but not everyone could belong to it. Feeling that old echo made me uneasy and grateful at once. You talk like you already decided, I said. Like this is a done deal. It is not, he answered. There's a problem, or perhaps I should say, there's pressure. He pushed off the fence and walked a few steps, kicking at a rock with the toe of his boot. The same people your son has been speaking with have been speaking with me, Summit Ridge, their acquisitions arm. They made it clear they would prefer a clean transfer, title out of your hands into theirs, then into whatever new entity we form together. They say it's tidier on paper. They're very insistent that you be not part of the long-term picture. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. I tried to keep my face still. So you and my son have spoken, I said. He nodded. Briefly, he said. I made it clear that I don't make deals behind the backs of the people who built what I'm trying to invest in. That did not go over especially well. I thought of Nathan at my table, the way his jaw had tightened when I said no. I thought of Chloe talking about special terms. What exactly are they telling you? That you are tired, he said. That you are overwhelmed. That you are attached to this place in a way that clouds your judgment. That the kindest thing would be for you to cash out and let professionals handle the rest. He let that sit for a heartbeat. I asked them if they had ever watched you bring in a harvest, he added. They did not answer that. The late sun slid lower, casting long shadows from the fence post. Somewhere a crow called again, the same sound as the day before, but it felt different now. Why are you telling me this? I said quietly. You could have just as easily gone along with them. Because if I'm going to stand next to someone in a fight, I want it to be someone who understands what they're up against, he replied. And because this is not the first time Summit Ridge has tried to push an older owner out in the name of efficiency. That night, after Andrew left with a promise to call in a day or two, I sat at the kitchen table with the old folders David had left stacked in the hall closet. Deeds, loan papers, insurance, the past spread out in manila and ink. The phone rang while I was still thumbing through a trust document I barely remembered signing. The number on the display was unfamiliar but local enough. This is Linda, I answered. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Caroline Cole. She said she was an attorney in Fort Collins, that she worked primarily with elder financial abuse cases. Then she said something that made my hand tighten around the receiver. I used to be married to Andrew, she said. He told me he had been out to see you. He also told me Summit Ridge is circling. I have represented 3 families in the last 5 years who lost their land in deals that started just like what you are facing. I listened as she laid out the pattern, her voice steady and precise. Inflated concern about the owner's stability, quiet pressure on the adult children, paperwork that shifted control one signature at a time. Every word slotted into something I had seen in my own living room. At one point, I cut in. How long have they been looking at this valley? I asked. Since at least 2012. she said. That is when Andrew funded that soil study he probably mentioned. Marshfield Acres was flagged as a rare asset in the preliminary report. I saw the file myself when we were still married. Rare asset? It sounded cold and clinical. It also sounded like something worth fighting for. When I hung up, the house was very quiet. The only sound came from the old clock in the hall, ticking its way through another evening. Outside, the fields lay in shadow, the outlines of the trees sharp against the last light. I rested my hand flat on the trust papers in front of me and let my eyes close for a moment. I had spent years telling myself that endurance was enough, that if I just kept going, the world would eventually leave me and my land alone. Now I knew better. The world was not going to leave us alone. And for the first time, I started to think about what it might look like if I did more than just stand my ground.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3: When the Truth Spills Out. The next sign came 2 mornings later, when the day was still cool and the sky over Maple Ridge was a soft, washed blue. I was in the lower barn going through feed inventory with Raphael when I heard a sharp edge in a voice outside. Not angry exactly, but tight, like a wire pulled too far. It was Nathan. I recognized that tone from when he used to argue with his debate coach in high school, convinced he was the only one in the room who really understood the rules. Raphael caught my eye and jerked his chin toward the open door. He whispered so Nathan would not hear. "Your boy has been pacing up by the truck for 10 minutes, he said. Sounds like serious business. I set the clipboard aside and walked quietly to the corner of the barn. From there, I could see Nathan near the old windbreak, his back half turned. He had one hand pressed to his forehead, his phone tight to his ear. I am telling you she will not sign without something in place, he said. We talked about a temporary power of attorney. Use that. Just get the final valuation locked before the quarter closes. My mouth went dry. I stepped back enough that he would not see me, but I stayed close enough to catch more. No, she has not seen anything yet, he went on. Look, elderly parents are always a little resistant at first. Summit Ridge is supposed to know how to handle this. That was the pitch. The word elderly hit me harder than it should have. I found myself gripping the rough wood posts beside me to keep my hand steady. Raphael moved up beside me, his brows drawn. You want me to chase him off the property? He murmured. I shook my head, though part of me wanted nothing more. No, I said softly. Not yet. Back in the kitchen, after Nathan had driven into town on some errand he did not bother to share with me, I pulled out the boxes of documents again. This time, I was not only looking at what David and I had signed over the years, I was thinking of what I might have signed recently without reading as closely as I should have. Those little forms that come with new accounts, with tax filings, with medical visits, the ones where they slide a pen across and tell you it is just standard. By lunchtime, Chloe had drifted into the dining room with her laptop, complaining about the spotty Wi-Fi. She plugged into the cable Nathan had snaked from the office so they could both use my old desktop as a hub. When she finally went outside to take some pictures in the orchard, she left the screen awake. I know better than to snoop. Mothers are supposed to knock and wait, not read what's not meant for them. But the memory of Nathan talking about temporary control and final valuations would not leave me alone. I sat down in front of the computer and opened the mail program. Nathan had logged into his account and not bothered to log out. His name was right there at the top of the inbox. For a second, my finger hovered over the mouse. Then I clicked. The first thing that caught my eye was a thread labeled
Marshfield acquisition. The most recent message was from a man named Gavin Hart at Summit Ridge. Nathan, we need confirmation that your mother is no longer capable of managing legal and financial decisions on her own. The compliance team will not approve the early transfer package without that documentation. You said you had a physician report and some cognitive flags from the last hospital visit. Please forward those at your earliest convenience. GH. My stomach turned. My last hospital visit was for a fainting spell after working too long in the heat. I'd been dehydrated. That was all. They had run the usual tests, asked the standard questions. I remember stumbling over the date for a second and laughing it off with the nurse. One moment of confusion, one imperfect answer, and now it was being turned into something else. I scrolled down and saw Nathan's reply from a few days earlier. Gavin, we need something more formal. I can get incident notes from the ER last summer. In the meantime, I will position this with her as a safety net. She already struggles with online banking and tax forms. There will be no pushback if we frame this correctly. N. Behind those sentences, I could hear his voice from my kitchen telling me he only wanted me to relax, to let him take things off my plate. There were other emails too. Some were about Chloe. Hi, Nathan. We have flagged your account for delinquent taxes in excess of $40,000 for year 2023. Our office has been more than patient. Without proof of incoming funds or an immediate payment plan, we will proceed with garnishment. The message was from a firm in Los Angeles, a city Chloe had been talking about as if it were a dream. Suddenly, I saw the shape of that dream more clearly. Glamorous posts, sponsored deals, and beneath it all, a debt that she had not once mentioned to me. I backed away from the computer slowly. It felt like standing up too fast from weeding and realizing the world was a little tilted. That evening, just before supper, I heard voices drift in through the open kitchen window. Nathan and Chloe were on the back porch, talking low, but not low enough. I told you this would not be simple, Nathan said, exasperation edging his words. You can't just flatter her into signing. We need something legal on file. Chloe sounded frantic. I have brands waiting, Nate. If Summit Ridge doesn't wire that money soon, my accounts are frozen. They are already threatening to drag my name online. Do you have any idea what that would do to me? I'm trying, he snapped. Gavin says we can use those old medical notes. Every person over 60 has some cognitive flag if you read the fine print. We just need to get the temporary control in place. Once the transfer is done, she can sit on whatever porch she wants. There was a pause, a scuff of shoes. And what if she finds out? Chloe asked, voice suddenly small. By the time she does, it'll all be over. Summit Ridge will own the land, the farm will be shut down. She'll thank me when she's safe and comfortable and not wandering around in fields she can't manage. The words came through the screen of the window and sank straight into the softest parts of me. I set the dish trowel down very carefully on the counter, then walked away before I did something we all would regret. Later that night, when I spoke to Caroline again on the phone, my voice did not shake the way it had before. Can they really take my land using some form that says I'm not capable? I asked. They can try, she said. It's a common tactic. They gather every little medical note, every confused answer, and stitch it into a story of incapacity. Judges are used to seeing it, especially when the pressure comes from the children. Summit Ridge has been named more than once in complaints, but so far they've stayed just this side of criminal. I told her about the emails, about the talk of temporary authority. It sounds like your son is trying to create a paper trail that backs their narrative. If he gets you to sign anything that shifts decision power, even briefly, they'll use it to argue you agreed you needed help. After that, things moved fast. The next day, Deputy Marshal Reed showed up in his county SUV, dust puffing out behind him as he pulled in. He took off his hat as I met him on the porch. "Good afternoon, Linda," he said. "Mind if I sit a minute?" We sat on the steps, looking out over the yard. He didn't rush. "There's an inquiry open on Summit Ridge, state level. Pattern of acquisitions that doesn't look right when you put it all on a map. Older owners, contested signatures, that sort of thing. Your place came up on a list of targeted properties." I felt the air cool around us, though the sun was high. "They haven't bought anything here yet. They're trying." He nodded. "I figured as much. I'm not here to tell you what to do with your land. But if anyone asks you to sign anything you don't understand, especially if it says anything about letting someone else handle decisions, you call me or you call Caroline first. Don't let them corner you in a room with a stack of papers." After he left, the yard seemed too quiet. The old trust documents were still spread out on the dining room table, Andrew's notes folded beside them, and now the weight of what I had heard from my own children hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. I walked through the house, touching the backs of chairs, the doorframe where we had marked Andrew and Chloe's heights every birthday, the photograph of David holding a newborn calf in his arms like it was made of glass. I had spent weeks telling myself they were just misguided, that they believed they were helping, that if I explained how much this place meant to them, they would understand and back down. Now I knew that was a lie I was telling myself to soften the blow. Nathan wasn't confused, he was building a case.
Chloe was not simply swept up in some glamorous life. She was drowning. And instead of reaching for a life raft of her own making, she had decided to pull the farm under with her. The hurt of that settled in my bones more deeply than any winter cold. It was not a clean wound. It was jagged, full of little pieces that would be hard to remove. In the stillness of that afternoon, with the fields shimmering under the sun and the house heavy with old paper and older memories, suspicion hardened into something else. This was not just about holding on anymore. It was about proving that I still knew exactly who I was and what this land was worth, no matter what story my own children tried to write on top of it. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 4. The Power to Stand Up. I started in the hall closet, in the place where the carpet was worn from years of David setting boxes down with a grunt. The file tubs were older than Nathan, plastic gone cloudy, lids bowing up a little in the middle. I dragged them into the dining room one by one, the effort making my back ache, and stacked them on the table where we had once done school projects and birthday cakes. Tax years, insurance policies, equipment manuals, all of it washed in the same faded manila. I worked my way backward through time, hands moving faster once muscle memory came back. 2021, 2017, the folder with David's handwriting that still made my throat tighten. Mortgage paid in full, loan satisfied. Then a slimmer file, labeled in my own slow script. Marshfield Living Trust. I remembered signing something at the lawyer's office 10 years back. Remembered David saying it was just a way to avoid probate, to make things easier if he went first. I had not thought about it since. I sat down, smoothed the first page, and began to read. It started with the usual language about grantors and beneficiaries and the trustee. But about 10 pages in, my eyes caught on a heading in bolder type. Agricultural Protection Provision. My heart picked up. I read every word twice, lips moving silently. The clause stated that the primary asset of the trust, meaning Marshfield Acres, could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered in any way while either grantor was still living, except by the explicit written direction of that grantor and after a mandatory review confirming capacity by an independent attorney. There was more. Lines about children having no authority to execute sale documents without that review, about any powers of attorney being subordinate to the trust language. David had insisted on that. I could see him in my mind, shifting in his chair, telling the lawyer he had watched too many neighbors lose their land when one stroke or one bad fall put things in the wrong hands. He had put a shield around me and the farm, 10 years before I knew I would need it. My hands trembled, but not from fear this time, from something like relief, from anger shaped into something useful. I called Caroline first. It was late for a weekday, but she picked up on the second ring. "I found our safety net," I said. "There is a living trust from 2013. It has a clause that locks the farm unless I say otherwise. In writing, with the lawyer like you signing off that I know what I am doing." Her intake of breath hissed softly over the line. "Do you have a copy of the entire document?" she asked. "I am holding it," I said. "Good," she answered. "Take pictures of every page. Email them to me. This changes the terrain. Any power of attorney your son tries to file will crash hard into that trust language." I did as she asked, page after page, under the yellow lamplight. Once I had sent everything, my shoulders dropped for the first time in days. There was still a fight ahead, but at least I was not walking into it empty-handed. The next morning, Andrew came out again, his notebook full of numbers and maps. We sat at the table with the trust in front of us, and his data spread around it like a storm system. I had my analysts pull updated soil maps and yield comparisons, he said. "Summit Ridge is either pretending not to know what this valley will be worth, or they are counting on you not knowing. They are offering you 40 cents on the dollar for what this place is likely to be in 15 years. 15 years is a long time for a woman my age," I said quietly. He nodded. "It is," he said. "That is why partnerships matter. With the right infrastructure investment, this land could fund your retirement and still be a working farm long after both of us are gone." He tapped the trust document with one finger. "And with this language," he added, "no one can force that decision without you." Raphael stopped by later with a thumb drive he had dug out of his records. On it were high-resolution images from a study the State University had done here a few years ago, showing microbial diversity in our soil versus neighboring conventional fields. "They did not want to pay us much for the use of the land back then," he said, grinning a little. "But at least we got the data." "Print some of these charts," I asked him, "big enough that even a stubborn man in a tie can't pretend he doesn't see them." That afternoon, I drove my old truck down the road to see Helen Dawson. Helen had been on her little spread since before I married David. She was 67 now, wiry and tough, with eyes that missed nothing. When she opened the door and saw my face, she stepped aside without a word and pointed me toward her kitchen. "I made tea, and I have a feeling you're not here because you suddenly developed a taste for my dry cookies." I told her everything. About Summit Ridge, about Nathan and Chloe, about the emails and the hospital notes. She listened, that same old tight line settling between her brows. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "My boys did it quieter. Did I ever tell you that?" I shook my head. "They took me to a lawyer in town right after my fall. Said it was just to make sure the bills got paid while I was on pain meds. They slid papers in front of me. Later, I found out they had slipped in a durable power of attorney for property. Within a year, the place was in their names, not mine. They sold off the back 40 to a developer before I even realized it. Her voice did not crack, but her hands did tighten around her mug. If you have a chance to stop that from happening to you, you take it, Linda. Even if it means your kids don't call for a while. When I went home, something inside me had settled. Not in resignation, into resolute. For 2 days, I moved quietly. I kept my phone in my apron pocket and turned the voice memo app on whenever Nathan or Chloe started in about the farm. It felt dirty at first, recording my own children. Then Nathan said, "Once this transfer is done, she can rant all she wants. Legally, it won't matter." And I pressed my thumb more firmly on the screen. Chloe was no better. "I can't keep waiting," she said in a hiss in the guest room hallway on one of her late-night calls. "Just get Summit Ridge to cut the check. If we have to fast-track something with a doctor, do it. She zones out half the time anyway. No one will be surprised." Each line felt like a little cut. I let them bleed into the recorder and told myself this was not about revenge. It was about truth. By Friday, everything was in place. The trust papers, the soil data, the emails printed and highlighted, the recordings saved in 3 different places. I called Nathan first. "I want you and your sister here tomorrow, 10 in the morning. We're going to sit down and talk like a family." I heard suspicion in his pause. "Is this about the offer?" "It is about the farm. And about me." He agreed. Chloe did too, though her sigh on the other end of the line made it clear she had other plans she'd rather not cancel. Saturday morning dawned hot and bright. I made coffee because my hands needed something to do and set out 3 mugs at the table, then stacked the folders in the center neat and square. They came in together, the way they had when they were small and used to race from the bus to see who could reach me first. Now they carried the same phones, the same air of hurry, but the innocence was long gone. Nathan glanced at the folders. "Please tell me that is not more paperwork." "It is everything," I answered. "Sit down." They sat. I did not. "This is the living trust your father and I signed in 2013. It says this farm cannot be sold while I'm alive unless I choose it, and a lawyer like Caroline signs off that I know what I am doing." I slid the top document toward Nathan. He skimmed, his expression tightening as he saw the bold print. "This is some old form. There are ways to work around it." "Not easily," came the voice from the doorway. Caroline stepped in, her briefcase in one hand, a calm smile on her face. I had asked her to be here, not just as my attorney, but as a witness who could not be dismissed as sentimental. Nathan's eyes flashed. "You brought a lawyer to a family talk?" "I brought clarity," I replied. I laid the printed emails on the table, one by one. The message about my supposed incapacity, the note about using my emergency room visit, the plans to fast-track a temporary transfer before the quarter closed.
Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. "You read my mail," Nathan said, color rising in his cheeks. "I read what you wrote about me," I countered. "You want to tell me now that those words were taken out of context?" He did not answer. Then I pulled my phone from my pocket, set it face down. "I also listened," I said softly, "to the way you spoke when you thought I could not hear. About elderly parents who always resist. About getting the papers in place before I know what hit me. About using Summit Ridge to push me off my own land." Chloe shook her head.
eyes shining. "We were scared. You could fall. You could get sick. We were just trying to make sure everything was handled." "No," I said, my voice steady. "If you were scared for me, you would have talked with me. You were scared for yourselves, for your debts, for your reputation." That is what Summit Ridge smelled when they came sniffing around. Silence fell heavy over the room. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the cottonwood leaves. "You are not just trying to sell some acreage," I said finally. "You are trying to sell me. My say in my own life. My history. My promise to your father." Nathan's jaw worked. "We are trying to save you from yourself," he snapped. "You are not thinking clearly. This place is too much. You do not even realize when you are confused." Caroline leaned forward, her tone cool. "I have spent my career testing exactly that. I met with your mother yesterday. I can tell you she is of sound mind, which is more than I can say for whoever advised you to pursue this strategy." His glare slid from me to her. "You do not get to talk to me that way," he said. "I get to do a lot more than talk if you file one fraudulent form," she replied. Before he could answer, tires crunched on gravel outside. A moment later, there was a knock on the open door, and Deputy Reed stepped in, hat in his hands. "Morning," he said. His eyes moved from me to the table, to the tight faces of my children. "Looks like I walked into something." "You came at the right time," I said. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to do this in person," he said. "Summit Ridge Holdings is now under formal investigation for manipulating elder property transfers from 2020 to 2024. A man named Gordon Hale has started talking. Your name came up, Nathan, as a helpful family contact." Nathan went very still. "I did not do anything illegal," he said weakly. "I just introduced people." "That is for the state to decide," Reed answered. "My advice is that you stop introducing anyone to anything around here for a while." Andrew arrived that afternoon after Reed had gone and my children had retreated to whatever corners they could find to lick their wounds. He pulled into the yard with the same unhurried calm as always and sat with me on the back porch steps. "I heard from Caroline," he said. "I am sorry it went the way it did, though I am not surprised. I finally told them no, in a way they could not step around." He nodded. "Good," he said, "because I talked to the State Agriculture Office this morning. They are interested in making Marshfield Acres a flagship site for a program I've been trying to launch from 2025 to 2030. Education, resilience, community supply. They want you as the operating head, Linda. Not some corporation, you." The word "you" did something warm to the cold place inside my chest. I looked out over the fields, the dry grass, the stubborn green in the rows we had nursed along through another hard season. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I was standing alone in front of the storm. I felt like I had planted my feet and the wind had finally met something it could not push over. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The Land, the Legacy, the Woman I Became. In the weeks that followed, the future of Marshfield Acres shifted from something people tried to take from me into something I chose for myself. The first real turning point came in a small conference room at the county extension office. The walls were lined with posters about soil health and drought-tolerant crops, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and dry erase markers. Across the table sat a representative from the state agriculture department, a couple of local officials, and Andrew, with his notebook and his calm, steady presence. In front of me lay a simple partnership agreement that had taken a team of lawyers, including Caroline, far smarter than me, to craft.
The language was clear. The land stayed in my name, and inside the trust David and I had created, I would remain the operating head of the farm for as long as I chose and was able. Andrew would bring in capital for infrastructure, water systems, and renewable energy, and in return, his company would share in a portion of the increased profits once those investments took effect. There was a section about education programs and community outreach, another about preserving the organic status and heritage practices that had gotten us this far. When the last question had been answered and the last section explained, they placed a pen beside the signature line. My hand hovered for a moment, and in that silence, I thought about all the times I had signed things in my life without really understanding what they meant. Health forms, school permissions, bank papers where I trusted the person on the other side of the desk more than I trusted myself. This time, I knew exactly what I was doing. I signed. Caroline signed. The state officials added their names. Andrew added his. With a few strokes of ink, Marshfield Acres stepped into a new chapter, not as a trophy to be flipped by some holding company, but as a partner in something that would outlast me. Word spread fast, as it does in small communities and in industries where everyone watches what everyone else is doing. Summit Ridge pulled back, without so much as a phone call. Their lawyers sent a short, cool message acknowledging the trust language and the new partnership and informing us that they would no longer be pursuing acquisition. I felt nothing but relief reading it. It was like watching a storm skirt around the edge of your land and move off over some other horizon. The investigation into their past dealings did not move quite as quickly, but it did move. Deputy Reed kept me informed in his slow, methodical way. Complaints from other families were taken seriously. Patterns were documented. Somewhere far above my head, in offices I would never see, people in suits sifted through files, much like the ones that had once sat on my dining room table. Consequences rippled outward. Nathan called one evening to tell me he had been placed on leave at his firm while they did their own review of his involvement with Summit Ridge. His voice was flat, tired, stripped of the easy confidence that used to fill every sentence. I listened. I told him I was sorry he was going through it. I did not rush to rescue him or tell him it was unfair. For the first time in his life, he was standing in the path of the choices he had made, and there was nothing between him and their impact. It hurt to let that be true, but I did. Chloe left earlier than planned. There were no slammed doors or dramatic scenes, just suitcases dragged down the hall, the faint smell of her expensive shampoo lingering in the bathroom, a highway taillight disappearing toward Denver. Months later, I would hear through a friend of a friend that she had taken steady work managing social media for a small company and had arranged a payment plan for her taxes. It was not glamorous. It was finally responsible. That knowledge settled over me with a mix of sorrow and pride. Our relationships did not break cleanly. They frayed, then held at a new distance. There were texts on holidays, short calls on birthdays. No one said the words that hung between us. You betrayed me. I failed you. We simply lived forward, each in our own way. Meanwhile, the farm changed shape in ways I could feel under my feet. New irrigation lines went in, shining and efficient where the old, brittle pipes had been. Crews installed a modest array of solar panels near the equipment shed, panels that turned the stark Colorado sun into power that hummed quietly through our pumps and lights. The first time Raphael flicked on the new system and everything worked, without groaning or flickering, he grinned at me like a kid on Christmas morning. "Look at that, Miss Marsh," he said, though he did not need the words and I did not need the title. We both knew who had kept this place alive long enough to see that moment. The state launched the first of the Heritage Fields education weekends that fall.
College students, young families, and a few gray-haired couples arrived in muddy boots and clean sneakers, ready to learn how food actually grows. I stood at the front of a group in the main field and talked about cover crops, about rotations, about the way David's eyes used to light up at the first true leaf on a seedling. They listened, they took notes. Some of them looked at me the way I had once looked at older women who seemed to know something about the world I did not yet understand. At the official launch of the program, reporters from the regional news and a smaller national outlet gathered under a rented canopy near the barn. The governor's agriculture liaison spoke. A dean from the university spoke. Then it was Andrew's turn. He walked up to the microphone, tie-less but in a jacket for once, and looked out over the small crowd. Someone asked him why he had chosen Marshfield Acres for the pilot site. There were larger farms in the state, flashier ones with more immediate return. He rested his hand on the edge of the podium and smiled once in my direction before he answered. "I did not choose this place just because of the soil," he said. "I chose it because of the person who refused to abandon it. Land only stays alive when someone is willing to stand on it in the hard years. Linda did that long before I ever showed up, and that is why you are all standing here now." There was a murmur of appreciation, a ripple of applause. I felt my face grow warm, but underneath the embarrassment was something deep and steady. After years of feeling like an obligation or an obstacle in the eyes of my own children, hearing someone name my stubbornness as a virtue felt like a kind of quiet vindication. Later, when the tents were folded and the visitors were gone and the sun was sliding down toward the ridge, I walked the fields alone. The air was soft, cooled by evening. The new irrigation system ticked faintly in the distance, a mechanical heartbeat keeping time with my own. Rows of young plants caught the last light, their leaves glowing with that almost translucent green that always made me think of hope. I passed the old cottonwood where David and I had carved our initials the first year we owned the place. The bark had grown around the letters, softening them, but if you knew where to look, you could still see them hiding in the ridges. For the first time in a long time, thinking of him did not make my chest ache. It made me feel accompanied. It felt as if he had set me on a path a decade ago with that trust document, and now I had finally followed it all the way to where he hoped I would stand. I realized, somewhere between the barn and the back fence, that I had been grieving more than his death all these years. I had been grieving the idea of a family that would always be on my side. The version of Nathan and Chloe that lived in my head, the one that stayed small and soft and uncomplicated, did not match the adults who had walked into my kitchen with plans to sign my life away. I had lost that illusion, and I was still losing it in pieces. But I had not lost everything. I still had this land. I still had my name on its deed and my fingerprints in its soil. I had neighbors and workers and new partners who saw me as more than a burden. I had the strange, late-in-life satisfaction of knowing I had been underestimated and had proven people wrong without shouting or burning everything down. Standing at the fence line, watching the light fade over the valley, I understood something simple and hard-won. Sometimes the only revenge worth taking is to outlast a story someone else tried to write for you. To keep showing up in your own life day after day until the truth of who you are stands taller than their version of you. If you have ever felt someone try to push you out of your own story, you know a little of what this farm and I have walked through. And if you want to hear more about quiet battles like this one, about people who choose proof over rage, you're welcome to stay, to listen, and to walk a little farther with me the next time the wind starts to rise.